Hello, and welcome to another live stream for Based on a True Story. If you've watched any of the others, this is going to be fairly similar to that, where we're kind of going behind the scenes of Based on a True Story and just kind of chatting about what's going on with the podcast. With episodes coming up, this is the off week for public episodes. That doesn't mean there's nothing coming out. That's this Monday, Kong Skull Island, I believe. Let me check the calendar real quick. My computer's over here. Yes, Kong Skull Island is the mini-sode that will be releasing for patrons over on the producer's feed. That episode was a lot of fun to do because even though Kong is obviously fictional character, right? But if you watch, in particular, Skull Island, I picked that one because it's the most recent iteration of Kong and one of my favorites, actually. So in that, there's a lot of history that we can see, even though most of it's fictional. By that, what I mean is things like, it was kind of set during Vietnam, but it was also you see the military rolling out and all these different elements, and there's the government organization, Monarch, I believe, the secret government organization that you see, that all these things that kind of try to tie it to reality. And so it was fun to research that. And I actually got to dig a lot into King Kong himself, not King Kong himself, but the author of King Kong, rather, the guy who came up with King Kong. And so I shared some of that in the mini-sode as well, because that guy's life was just amazing. It was just one of those things where I don't know how he was able to pack like a dozen different careers into a single lifespan. It was pretty remarkable. So that episode will be coming out on Monday. And then actually, I don't expect anybody to be watching this particular video live because I'm recording at like 7:45. I'm in Central Time, so 7:45 in the morning on Saturday. Hopefully you are sleeping in. I wish I was, but right after this, I'm going to be recording the next episode, which is coming out the following Monday, not this Monday, but the following Monday, the 25th. And looking at my calendar, that is JFK, 1991's Oliver Stone film about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy. And so there's a lot of conspiracy around that, and that was a lot of fun to write and research. And that's one of those that I'll tell you right now, and you'll hear it when you listen to the episode. But I had to put a disclaimer in that because, there's so many conspiracies around the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's no way a single episode could cover all of them, and so I just know that I'm never going to make everybody happy because I'm not going to cover their favorite conspiracy, or I'm not going to cover that little detail, that one little detail that they think is the linchpin for it all, or there's so many different avenues. So I'd be curious to hear when you listen to that one, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are when that comes out on February 25th. All right. So I know the last video that we did, I mentioned that I might be talking about kind of the other side of how I finance the podcast through tutorials. But I actually started something last week or a couple weeks ago. Can't remember when it was actually. After the last video, I started something, and that was just posting on medium.com. So there's a Based on a True Story podcast publication over there. Go ahead and follow along if you want to see what I'm writing there. But basically, it's just kind of like this, but in a written form. So I do a lot of writing, obviously for the podcast, but also a day job over the past few years, many years. And so there's a lot of things that I've seen as a podcaster over the past. When did I start? So it's probably been 5 years now, I think, including not just Based on a True Story, but the podcast that I had before that. So there's been a lot that I've seen over those years, and from the standpoint of both a listener to podcasts, because I consume podcasts all the time. I love podcasts, obviously. But also as a podcaster, there's been a lot that I've seen going on in different communities and different discussions and a lot of technology that's arisen and a lot of technology that's fallen and a lot of different things. So really what I wanted to do over on Medium is to just talk about some of that. Just some of the things. It's kind of a rant, probably isn't the correct word, but that's kind of what a lot of it is. It's just kind of things that, I see that are just things that I think either can be approved or just ideas that I have or just kind of throwing things out there. So anyway, with that in mind, I thought I'd talk about kind of the first article that I did, and it was actually picked up by Pod News. So thanks, James Cridland, for picking that up. The first article that I did was called "Yes, Discoverability is an Issue in Podcasting." And that boils down to something that I've seen a lot, or I guess I should say I've heard a lot in podcasting, especially recently. So there's a lot of new players that come into the space. There's new companies that come in. Pandora is a great example. And so they say things like, we're going to fix the discoverability issue in podcasting. And then there's a ton of veteran podcasters and even some podcast hosts that will go out there and say, there's no discoverability issue in podcasting. And then they prove it by just saying, well, what are you interested in? Are you interested in, I don't know, you're interested in microphones? Okay, do a search for microphones, and you're going to find a ton of different podcasts for you to pick from that are all about microphones. So obviously, discoverability is not an issue. And my kind of my take on that is that yes, there's a ton of different podcasts out there, and there's a lot of different niche podcasts, which I think are great. I mean, I haven't looked, but I'm sure if you did a search for microphones, you could probably find a podcast just about microphones, learn how they work and what's best for different things and all that kind of stuff. There's so many niche podcasts out there that I think are great, and you can find some information that's really specific to what you want to listen to. But in my mind, that is not discoverability. Those are just search results. So in the article, I kind of use this example. If you think of when you're searching for something on Google, right? Say you do a search for microphones, and you're going to get millions and millions of hits. I haven't done the search. I could do it right now if we wanted to do that. Just real quick over here on my computer, microphones. Let's see how many search results come back. I'm not using Google as my default. Sorry about that. So it did not come up in Google. I use DuckDuckGo as my default browser. All right, so doing a search for microphone right now comes up with 617 million results. Okay, that's fine. That's a ton of different results for microphones. But is that discoverability? Is that finding the microphone that you want? No, of course not. Just like searching for a podcast is not the same as discoverability. It's search results. That's the first step. But I'll use my own preferences as a great example, and I did that in the article as well. So it may not be too surprising that I like to listen to a lot of either podcasts with a single host, an independent podcaster who's doing kind of a narration style, kind of like my own show. I like that style. I like some podcasts with multiple people on them. Podcasts like Not Alone, where you have a couple people kind of going back and forth. But that's not really an interview style. It's just the same hosts going back and forth. There's a few interview style podcasts that I'll listen to, but that's kind of rare. So those are kind of the two primary style of podcasts that I like. And of course, there's a good audio quality. You want to make sure that there's good audio quality because I listen to a lot of podcasts in my car. And so if the audio quality isn't good, it boils down to if I can't understand what's being said while I'm driving down the road because of the road noise or whatever it may be, if there's weather outside, if I can't understand what's being said, then I'll skip to the next episode or just unsubscribe completely if that's something that is consistent throughout all the episodes. So there's so many other things beyond just the topic of that podcast. That's kind of my point there is that the topic is just one factor that determines whether or not there's a podcast that I'm going to like. So true discoverability is really helping me find the podcast that I want to listen to. And there's so many other factors other than just the topic. That might be the first thing. I might want to search for podcasts on microphones, and that might be the topic that I want to have covered. But if it's a podcast about microphones that's doing a bunch of interviews, and I'm not really into interview podcasts, I might give it a shot, but chances are it's probably not going to be something that I listen to a lot of. If it's, I guess my point there is that there's just so many more things. And another example that I did not use on the Medium article, although I thought about doing it, is Amazon. So we're all familiar with Amazon. When you do a search on Amazon and it comes back with results, did you discover what you need? Right there. There's nothing else. Maybe you did. Maybe the top thing that you have is the top search result is the thing that you're going to purchase. But if you're anything like me, chances are you need to use the little filters on the left-hand side to filter it down a little bit more. Maybe filter by price range to determine what your budget is. Maybe if we're talking about, let's say the monitors in the back. Let's say I needed to buy new monitors, right? So one of the things that I'm going to filter by is not only budget, I'm also going to filter by the size. I want to make sure that it's going to fit on my desk. So I need to filter by the size of the monitor. I might filter by the inputs that it has to make sure it has HDMI, maybe DVI, or any of the other different display ports or things like that, depending on what the connections are on my computer. That's another filter I might need to do. I also want to filter based on the resolution of the monitor itself and see what resolution it's going to give me. There's a lot of different things that you're going to filter that search result to really narrow down to discover the thing that you need. And I think that's something that podcasting doesn't really have. A big reason for that, this is one of those things where I'm throwing out this is kind of an issue that I realize is out there, and I don't have the perfect solution in mind. I'm not sure what that perfect solution is. I just think that until the industry really recognizes that it is an issue, nobody's going to try to find that solution. I was going somewhere with that last thing, and I lost my train of thought. One thing that I do think is a great method of discoverability is actually word of mouth. I believe I mentioned that in the article as well. That's probably the closest thing that we have to true discoverability. And the big reason for that is because when your friend or family members recommends a podcast to you, it's probably going to be something that you like, more so than if you just do a search, I should say, because they already know you. They already know the kind of things that you like. They know that if you're into podcasts, they probably know some of the podcasts that you already listen to. And so they're like, oh, well, this one's similar to that. You would really like this show. And so that's why I think there's so many different places that are really saying that word of mouth is one of the best ways to discover podcasts. And I agree. I believe that that is the case. I don't think that there will really be a technical solution that will overcome that. I don't really think there needs to be a technical solution that overcomes that. But I think there does need to be a technical solution that will supplement that, because I'm not always going to have people to offer word of mouth solutions. I'll use myself as an example. I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I know a few friends that listen to some podcasts, but a majority of my friends and family members don't really listen to a lot of podcasts. The ones that do have a different style than I like to listen to, and that's fine. They listen to a different style as well, and we'll recommend podcasts back and forth from time to time. But when I'm sitting there in my car getting ready to go on a long drive, and I'm thinking, you know what, I really need to grab some podcasts to download and listen to on this trip. I could call up a family member or call up a friend and ask them to recommend some off the top of their head, but it'd be really nice to have that technical solution to search and then filter by those searches. Or even better, I would think it would be great if if that technical solution could figure out what you're listening to already, the things that you listen to, not only the things you listen to, but also the things that you skip would be a big factor into that. I know a lot of apps track that kind of thing. I use Pocket Casts, and it uses stats. It has stats in there that will show you how many things you skipped, how many intros you skipped, all these different things that are very kind of surface level stats as far as how they're displayed. But I think on the back end, they could use that to actually surface shows that you're going to like more. I will again use Pocket Casts as my example because that's the app of choice that I use. Discover in Pocket Casts is really two things. One, it is search. By Discover, I mean they actually have a tab called Discover, and that's where you find new podcasts, right? So, but it is search, which I've already mentioned. I don't agree is the same as discoverability. And the other thing in Discover is a list of editorially chosen podcasts. So they have like a top list overall, and then they have some popular categories, and then the top, I don't remember, 20 or so podcasts in each of those categories. Top is relative because really, I believe behind the scenes, if they're not pulling from Apple Podcasts, the iTunes sheets, maybe they're determining based on their own stats in their own app. I'm not sure how they're determining that. But nothing about any of that discoverability in that app has anything to do with the shows that I've listened to, the shows that I have skipped, the shows that I have subscribed to and then unsubscribed to because for whatever reason, the app won't know that I unsubscribed to a podcast because I couldn't understand what somebody was saying while I'm driving down the road because of the audio quality. But if they know that, and a lot of apps, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. I know a lot of podcast apps do have some audio capabilities to boost levels, to skip silences, things like that. So I know they're reading the audio in some way. And so if they can read that and say, oh, you know what? Dan doesn't really like podcasts that are below this certain LUFS level, So if you're doing a negative 16 LUFS, that's kind of the loudness levels. If the LUFS end up being like -5, that's really quiet. So Dan doesn't like podcasts that are below that. The app doesn't have to know that the reason I don't like that is because I can't understand what's being said while I'm driving down the road because of car noise. It just knows that pretty much anything below that is going to get unsubscribed. So don't even surface that. If there's something in the categories for discoverability that has that loudness level, then it's pointless to surface that to me. So anyway, so I know that's kind of a like I said, kind of a rant, but that's something that I've seen. As I mentioned, I don't know the exact solution to that. I believe that there's a lot of really, really smart people that are working in podcasting and a lot of great people, and they really want to solve a lot of the problems that there are out there. And I think discoverability is a major, major problem because it's something that will keep people listening to more podcasts. Not only that, it will help people find new podcasts because there are so many niche shows. There are so many great niche shows. Unfortunately, there are some either not as good niche shows. I won't say bad because, I guess, okay, there are some bad shows out there. For whatever reason, there's a lot of different reasons why you might consider a show bad. But there's also a lot of inactive shows out there. Anchor, the recent news with Anchor being bought by Spotify, that brings up a great discussion. I'm not going to talk about that because there's plenty of other podcasts that talk about that. But the Anchor, I think I might have the stats in that article. I don't remember because I don't have it up right in front of me. Anchor had something like 70,000 some new shows, but only a fraction of them were actually still active. Most of them, somebody creates a new podcast, maybe creates one episode, maybe two, maybe three, and then they stop. And so there's tens of thousands of inactive podcasts. So imagine if you're searching for microphones, right? and you find 50 podcasts. You're probably going to pick one either based on the title, based on the cover art, maybe who it's by, if you recognize the name, if it's a big company or big name that you recognize. And maybe you'll look in the description or look at some of the episodes to see what gets covered. But if you look in the episodes and you see, you know what, that last episode came out 2 years ago, if you're like me, unless it's something that I'm really, really interested in, I'm probably not going to look up information, especially about a microphone that's 2 years old, because technology moves so fast that that information is probably already outdated that I'm going to be learning in there. Maybe, maybe not. But that just showcases one of the issues with discoverability that's really only growing as more and more podcasts get thrown out there. The discoverability of those good niche podcasts become more and more difficult. And I think that's something that word of mouth is great. Online communities are great. There's a lot of great Facebook groups out there that will help you find podcasts. Podcast we listen to is one that I'm a part of. There's like 20,000 people in there or something like that. And almost every time that somebody in there asks, how do you find new podcasts? Most of the time people say either one, family or friends, or pretty much along those same lines, through this community, through an online community of people recommending. The basic thing is that people are recommending podcasts, and that's one of the primary reasons how a lot of people learn about new podcasts, which I think is great. But I think we can supplement that with some sort of a technical solution that really helps pinpoint the things that you want to watch, or the things that you want to listen to, and find that a little bit more. Being on YouTube's recommendations are a great example of ways of a tool that does that kind of thing. It tracks what you watch. It not only tracks what you watch, it tracks how long you watch it, tracks all of these different factors, a ton of factors, and they use that to determine what other types of videos you might be interested in. And I know of a lot of people that have said, it's kind of like a Wikipedia hole, right? Where you just click, and you just go through and you just follow, this rabbit trail. Very similar on YouTube. It's, you watch something and then there's a recommended video and you click on that, and then you watch something else and there's another recommended video and you click on, and it's just hours and hours. And it's because their recommendation is really good. They figured out that recommendation. So anyway, that's not really based on a true story related per se, but that is something that I've started over there on Medium. So if you're interested, I have the discoverability article up. I also have another article up. Let me just pull this up real quick, because I'm trying to remember what the other one was called. I wrote just a few days ago, and I already forgot the name of it. Oh, yes, that was just one of my crazy ideas that podcasters should be able to pick the analytics that are important to them. Since I already wrote that, I might as well chat about that one too. This video might not be necessarily talking about each of these articles as they come out, but it's kind of what's on top of my mind as I'm thinking about the podcast or podcasting in general. So with this article, the podcasters should be able to pick the analytics that are important to them. With the key thing that I think is the takeaway for this is every single podcast host that I've seen, and I'll be upfront, and I mentioned this in the article, I have not used every podcast host out there. That's not really what I do. I don't go out there and just use a lot of podcast hosts. There are a lot of people that in podcasting in particular that will do that. I looked at a lot of them based on screenshots in their help desk to kind of see. But typically, most of the time, what I found was that when you log into your podcast host and you look at your stats, there's one thing that comes up: downloads. Now, there's a lot of different ways that those downloads are shown. They're shown, overall, which is usually one of the biggest numbers, overall downloads. Everybody talks about, I have 1 million downloads or 2 million downloads, or I have 100 downloads or 200 downloads. And that is a big thing in podcasting. Everybody talks about their downloads. And that's, but then the other side of that is that everybody talking about their downloads, and then you hear all of these either podcast veterans or hosting companies or all these other people in podcasting saying, no, don't focus on downloads. That is not the key metric. Focus on engagement. Engagement with your audience is the key metric. As you're watching this, you're chatting back with me or afterwards, because this is I guess it's 8:00 now in the morning, because it's early in the morning on Saturday. I hope you're not watching this live. You're actually sleeping. You watch this later. But that interaction with the audience is one of the greatest things about podcasting, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I believe that. I think that as a podcaster, we should be able to choose those analytics, because when I first log into my, let's say I'm brand new to podcasting. When I first log into my stats, and the first thing that I see is downloads, and then I see that number start to rise, and I see the overall downloads number starts to rise, because the overall is always going to be the highest number. Anything below that is broken down. So like, Apple versus Google, or, Android versus, Apple Podcasts, things like that. That's all going to be a subset of the overall downloads. So that overall download becomes the number that people want to see rise, because that's what they're tracking. And podcast hosts will put that right up front. Like usually at the top of the stats is overall downloads. And so that's what people focus on. And so if that's what is presented as the primary thing, of course that's what people will focus on, because that's what they're being told is the most important. They're being told that is the header. Think of it like any sort of a blog article or anything. The header is what you read first. If total downloads is what you read first, that's what's most important. And so that's what a lot of, especially newer podcasters, they really start to focus, and they really start to get hung up on that total overall download number. And that's something that I think can be, oops, I bumped the mic there, or the camera. That's something that I think can be, it can be too bad, because you can get too hung up on that and you don't really see the bigger picture, that engagement and building a community and getting people to interact with you on a topic that you're passionate about. So my podcast is about movies and history. When people reach out to me and talk about the movies that they love and the history around them, and they recommend articles and they pass on articles, and oh, did you see this? They found something new about the Titanic, or they whatever. I love that. That is absolutely amazing. And that's one of the primary reasons why I love doing the podcast, is because I get to talk to other people who love movies and history just like I do. And that's one of the key drivers for a lot of podcasters, especially veteran podcasters who keep going for years and years and years. It's not to see the total download number go up. That is helpful if you want to do advertising. Advertisers will look at that total number. But even then, I should take that back, because even then they don't look at the total number. Advertisers want to know the number of downloads an episode has in the past 30 to 45 days, usually, roughly the last month. So in the last month, how many downloads did this have? Most podcast hosts don't even show that number on a per episode basis without requiring you to do some extra work. And realistically, it's extra work like downloading the data and bringing it into Excel as a CSV and running all those numbers. Most people aren't going to do that. I've done that, but most people aren't going to do that. But the key thing there, and really the summary of this article, the point that I was trying to get across is, I think that there should be an ability to track engagement for podcasts more than downloads. So what I'm envisioning in my head, my crazy idea with this article was, when I log into my podcast host and I go to stats, I don't want to see downloads. I want them to be there, because I love data and I want to be able to see all of that information. I still want that to be there, but I want to set up a profile where my default profile, and I'm thinking of like Google Analytics that lets you set up your different dashboards. So the default dashboard that I log into is all about engagement. So for example, the host that I use Libsyn as a podcast host, and they offer a website. They offer a website for your podcast. They offer a custom app. They offer the ability to publish to different destinations like Facebook and YouTube. And I'm not using all of those personally. I built my own websites. I'm not using the Libsyn one. But even then, they offer the ability to embed a player, so they know how many times it's being played from my website, or how many times it's being played from. And there's also share links on that player, but I don't ever get to see when somebody shares that episode from that player. I mean, that's really, that to me, if somebody shared the episode from the Libsyn player on my website, that is more important to me than being able to see that somebody listened to it from that player. Because that means somebody engaged with it. Not only are they listening to it, they're sharing it. That's that word of mouth. Other people are discovering my podcast because of somebody else. Somebody else liked it so much that they're willing to encourage that and to share that episode. And so that is the type of analytics that I would love to be able to see. And I'm going to use Libsyn as an example because that's what I'm most familiar with. And because that's what I use. I'm sure the others are very similar in the way that they work. But like the custom app. So if you search on the iOS, I know it's or Android, it's the Play Store, the App Store, I guess, on iOS. I don't own any Apple devices. If you search on there for Based on a True Story podcast, there's an app, and that's a custom app that Libsyn built, and that's one of their services. And through the app, you're able to comment on episodes. You're able to share. You're able to reach back out to me through the contact information that's provided in there. There's a lot of different ways that you can engage, and I think that's great. I just never am able to see any of those stats on the back end. All I see are downloads. All I see are how many times somebody has played it through the app. I don't see any of those engagement things. And I know right now you're thinking, well, but if somebody reaches out to you, then of course you'll get the email, right? Yeah, that's great. I will get the email, but I don't know what that episode was that they were listening to unless they specifically say it. So let me put this in terms of kind of like with downloads. So one of the key things, key metrics for advertisers, as I mentioned before, in downloads is the number of downloads in the past 30 days. I would love to see that same thing, but for engagement. So rather than seeing, so what did I say? The next episode coming out in 2 weeks on the 25th is JFK. I would love to see. There's JFK, and then the last episode that just came out this past Monday was Bohemian Rhapsody. So 2 different episodes. I would love to be able to see in my podcast analytics, Bohemian Rhapsody got 1,000 engagements in the first 30 days. JFK got 1,500 engagements in the first 30 days. Now, you can break those engagements up, and though it's going to be a little bit different, I'm thinking here kind of the way Facebook Analytics does it, where they have, there's likes, there's reactions, there's comments, there's shares. Each of those are 4 different types of engagement, but it's all engagement. So if somebody likes it and then they share it, that's 2 engagements. You could break that down however you wanted to, and I think it would be great to be able to do that kind of thing. But we're not seeing any of it right now, so I would be happy with any of it. But if I could see that, in the first 30 days, Bohemian Rhapsody caused 1,000 engagement, things of engagement. I'm not sure what you call that, pieces of engagement, and that 1,000 different ways that people engage versus JFK in the first 30 days was 1,500. And then the next one is, back down to 1,000. Well, I know that JFK, there's something going on there that really sparked people's interest and really started to do that. And that's the kind of feedback that would be more important to me as a podcaster. And I say this from my own perspective, and that's really obviously the only one that I have. Excuse me. Sorry. So the reason why that's so important, sorry, to me is because Based on a True Story, You've probably noticed this, but I don't have any advertisers. Um, I've had advertisers reach out, but I don't have any advertisers for the show. So whether or not I get the magical number of 5,000 downloads per episode in the past 30 days, which is kind of what people in the industry say is the magic number that advertisers look for, that's irrelevant to me because I'm not going for advertisers. But if I can get 5,000 engagements in the past 30 days per episode, that's amazing. And that's one of those things that I would love to be able to track. I realize there's a lot of technical hurdles in that. Some hosts, don't have all of the capabilities as others do. And so, being able to track those things across different platforms might be difficult. I'm sure that you could probably hook into Google Analytics and Facebook API. Still something stuck in my throat. Sorry. In order to get a lot of that. So before I mentioned, I used the Libsyn player on my website, my custom built website for Based on a True Story. And so that player there, it's going to track some things, but the website as a whole, I've got where you can reach out, you can contact me on through the website, you can request an episode on the website, you can click through, and all of that stuff on the back end. Google Analytics can track a lot of things. So if somebody clicks on, goes to the contact page, I can see that somebody went to the contact page, right? Because that's what Google Analytics does. But I would love to see that stuff surface in the actual podcast analytics and tie it to episodes. So what that would look like in my mind is there's still Google Analytics, which is separate. But if I could maybe tie Google Analytics to my Libsyn, and then in the Libsyn dashboard, I can see, okay, this week I published Bohemian Rhapsody. Well, with Bohemian Rhapsody, when people were either listening on either of the Android or iOS app, or they were listening to it on your website, Libsyn just added a great new custom tracking code, which kind of helps you be able to do that, to say somebody's listening on this particular website, which is kind of cool. But from there, I would love to be able to see not only were they were listening to this in the app, or they were listening to this in on the website or through this player, wherever this player is embedded, but they clicked the share link, or they clicked the subscribe link from here. Right now, not seeing any of that information. And so the only engagement that I'm seeing basically is downloads. And that is, well, I agree with a lot of veteran podcasters that that's one of the least important statistics. And yet it's still one of the only ones that a lot of technology in the industry focuses on. All right. So basically, sorry about that. It's itchy throat there. That's kind of what those two articles. I know I've run about 40 minutes, well, a little bit long. And I need to get started on. It's not working. Sorry. I know it makes for horrible audio. And this is one of the things with live broadcast. There's not much I can do. If I were recording right now, which I'm going to be recording as soon as this is done, I just pause and then I will start back up again. That's the benefit of podcasting. Anyway, again, I hope to kind of continue. I've got a couple ideas mulling around for future articles and just kind of things that I've seen and just kind of crazy ideas or things. And I'd love to get your feedback. What do you think about them? If you go over to Medium and do a search for Based on a True Story podcast, you'll see that come up. That's a publication there. I've got a couple articles up, and I've got a couple more that I'm kind of thinking about, and I'll write them up here and there and get those out. And maybe we'll chat about some of them again on future live streams. But that'll pretty much kind of wrap this up here. Again, on the podcast, we have, looking at my schedule here, Kong Skull Island coming out on the 18th. I really hope that if you are a producer, On the producer's feed, you can get that at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/support. That is through Patreon and their RSS feed capability there. And it's just the minisodes. I do the minisodes for producers as a way of saying thank you for supporting the show, keeping the lights on, and really being able to, help me pay the bills that the show incurs. And there's a lot of costs. And then after that, on the public feed is JFK, and I'm really interested to see between Bohemian Rhapsody, which was one of the most highly requested episodes that I've ever had, and it's been doing really well so far. JFK is one that I've been postponing on purpose, but I've been postponing it on purpose. It's one that I had thought about doing a long time ago, but because of the reason that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's so many different conspiracies out there for JFK. I wanted to do it right. And after kind of postponing it for a while, and I started tackling it, I figure out, how can I do this? I'm really just trying to stick to the things that we see in the movie as I typically do with the podcast. Just sticking to the things that we see there, not getting too far outside of that. But then also trying to kind of put up the two different sides, because there's going to be multiple sides, and that's why there's so many conspiracies around it, and just letting you decide for yourself what you believe to be true. So anyway, that'll be a fun one. Hopefully, once I get that recorded and scheduled and ready to go, which I need to do right after this recording right here. So I will bid you adieu, and I hope that you have a great weekend, a great couple weeks. Until I see you next time for the next live stream, or if you're listening to the episode on Monday, I'll chat with you then on Monday, or if you're listening to the next public episode next Monday after that on the 25th, I'll chat with you then. In either case, I would love to hear your feedback on some of these ideas that I've had for podcasting and just kind of in general. Again, engagement is great, so go ahead and leave some comments in YouTube. You can reach out to me through the website at basedonatruestorypodcast.com. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Dan Lefebvre, DanLefeb, or you can shoot me an email at dan@basedonatruestorypodcast.com. So until next time, thanks for watching.